edition of Splitting Hairs with Max and Nicky. As usual, I'm Max.
And I'm Nicky.
And together we're Max and Nicky.
On today's episode, we'll be talking about the word literally, why it's overused so much in American culture especially, but actually in British culture, Canadian culture, and any English-speaking country, I think, overuses the word literally. And we'll be discussing why
we dislike that.
Well, we have a couple guests that will maybe refute what we
refute
think,
or maybe embrace our opinions.
But we don't. Max and I do not like the word literally. Actually, we despise it. We try to avoid using it at all costs, even when it's appropriate.
Yes, but we'll get into it. And we have a few guests to join our podcast today.
Our podcast.
You do it at your pad.
Our pad are the Maxi Padcast, actually.
We're at our pad. And
on our podcast today, we have comedian Mike Kaplan.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm happy to be here and in your lives.
We're happy that you are here and in our lives as well.
Much appreciated.
Some might say the best years of our lives.
I mean, I think the best ones include now.
Sure.
They're the ones that are happening.
Sure.
Sure. And we'd also like to welcome to the podcast.
Welcome back.
Welcome to the pad.
Well, we'd like to welcome back to the podcast.
Our very good friend
welcome back to the podcast, but welcome for the first time to the padcast.
Or welcome back to the padcast.
Ooh,
huh?
I like
about
it.
that.
Hey, now.
Welcome Weinbach.
Anyway,
welcome
guest
Weinbach
today,
to the podcast.
Our other guest today is our good friend Kevin Crooks.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
Do you guys ever make a joke like Weinbach to the future? Is that a thing you do?
We've never done that before.
That's fine. You don't have to.
And we never will.
We haven't done that, but we do things with the Bach last name.
That makes sense.
Actually,
Bok Choy.
Bok Choy or...
Well, I had a radio show when I was in college, the college radio station for UC Berkeley. It was called KALX, 90.7 FM, University of California, and listener-supported radio. And
that sounds professional.
In my that is the way we had to say the ID.
That was the only professional thing about the show.
No,
I'm just kidding. At least once an hour.
My radio show was called The Stream of Wine, which is what Weinbach means in German.
Oh.
And so Bach just meant stream.
And there was
I always like to have that association when I'm listening to Bach because it's like a stream of music that's inundating you, I guess.
And it's very modern, given, like modern digital platforms, very modern of him to have been kind of...
Like streaming services.
That's right.
Exactly.
He was way
ahead of his...
people think he's an innovative composer. He's even more innovative than you think.
Well, I would say some people thought he was stuck in his time in the sense that he hated the piano, but he actually loved digital streaming services.
Well, we don't know that he hated it. We just know that he didn't compose for the piano.
I thought they didn't have pianos.
It was starting to come around
at the end of his life.
Towards the end of his life, and but the precursor to the piano, obviously, there's the harpsichord, but something a little more similar was the clavichord,
right?
And but they would use that mostly for because it was so quiet. They would use that for rehearsing or practicing so that wouldn't disturb people. Actually,
that's so nice.
Yeah,
we took a whole class on Bach in college. Anyway,
can I say this is going to sound serious, but I assure you will only be for fun. I just wanted to make it expectations be appropriately met here. So if you were to want to listen to Johann Sebastian. It's hard to say his name. Johann Sebastian.
Sure.
On a platform like Spotify, you could say, I'd like to stream this man, or you could say, I'd like to Bach. Yeah. And then if somebody wouldn't let you, then you could be like, what are you, chicken? And then you could say Bach. There you go. You could do that.
That reminds me of an Arj Barker thing.
Arj Barker.
As
they say in Boston.
It's funny because he lives in Australia now.
As they say
they do that in Australia. Arj Barker.
Yeah.
But no, he
used to do this thing called the marijuana logs
with Doug Benson and Tony Kameen.
And Tony Kameen.
He had this bit where he was like a high concert goer in the early 1700s going to see a Bach concert, and he talks about how everybody was chanting Bach, 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 and it sounded as if there were a big chicken coming toward the venue.
I love it, and so I rescind.
No. I'm glad.
Nope, I take it back.
I'm glad.
Oh boy.
Well,
okay.
you could keep going on
It's
with
hot.
that.
Oh, no.
Well, if we wanted to listen to an album by Brent Weinbach, you might want to say, "I want a Bach Weinbach."
Oh yeah, or just put an apostrophe if you guys are all the box. You know,
Sure,
How about
sure.
think outside the box? That's if you want to listen to somebody who's not y'all.
We have we actually
Well, no, I don't think outside the box.
No, how
because
could you?
I
You couldn't.
I can't.
No, you can only think inside.
I can only think inside the box.
Thinking inside the box. That's a good podcast name, actually.
Go for it.
But not even just for us, but just as anyone, just even BOX, thinking inside the box.
Yeah,
But
That's
I feel
some
like
out-
it's a Sex in the City episode review podcast or something.
Sure.
I've
sure.
actually, funnily enough, I've never watched a whole episode of Sex in the City in my
but
life.
you've watched
It's a
one
wonderful
half
show.
of every episode,
Exactly.
right up until the end.
I gave
three
every
eighths of every
episode a chance, and halfway through, I was like, "This is not for me."
I have watched all of every episode.
You've watched every
Really?
episode.
Wow.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful show.
I've seen every
Okay,
episode of
I can-
a
okay.
lot of TV shows, but that's one I haven't seen every episode or any of the full episodes.
I think it seems like nobody can have seen every episode of every TV show at this point.
But
No,
one could try.
no.
Yeah, you could spend your whole life, but they're gonna keep
They're going to
making
keep
keep
making
it.
them. I think
And
at
there's
one
just
point,
more
though,
and
that
more
it would
and
have
more.
been possible, though.
Oh yeah, for sure. My grandmother
40s?
tells me. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there wasn't that. There was like 3 stations or something.
But I mean, it would be the difficulty back then would be that you couldn't.
You couldn't. Yeah, that's right.
VCR or DVR, so there could be only 3 shows on at a time, but it would be very difficult to see them all.
That's when ratings really mattered. I think.
Right,
They were
right,
like,
right.
well, we need to, get the viewers on our station.
Indeed.
But you had great TV.
But-
they had great product back then. I Love Lucy, your show of shows.
That's
I
it?
agree with those two. That was the 40s through the 70s.
Yeah,
I think that whenever people look back like on a time period fondly, like for art or entertainment, we're like, oh man, look at all these great things that came out then, and you can name so many things that you don't enjoy about now. But at the same time, there
were a
must
lot.
have been shows that are completely forgotten that
Sure.
didn't have the
History
staying power.
chooses to remember the things that we are most fond of.
Right, and as evidenced by like even oldies radio stations, there are certain things that I thought I knew. I do know oldies music pretty darn well, but I used maybe a few years ago, I thought, oh, I'm so good at knowing the oldies music, and then I just be hearing new stuff and knowing that and hearing about how that was even a hit back then. But the radio stations have decided, oh, this isn't fitting within our box, I guess. if you
Within
will.
our box.
Oldie Box and the 3 Worlds.
Our jukebox, actually, and of what we want to put out to the world, and therefore we're going to make it seem as though that wasn't a famous song back then.
Right.
And that's just, it's unfortunate, and that is something good about like the streaming services, like even just YouTube, even, you discover.
They'll recommend you different songs from. We listen to oldies music a lot, and when we say oldies music, for you listeners out there, we mean 50s and 60s music.
Or even prior to
Because
that,
some
too.
stations, some oldie stations, I don't think there's too many out
think
there
there's
anymore,
very
but
many
they
anymore.
they might consider 70s, 80s, and 90s oldies,
mean-
which is weird to me.
As we continue to move forward in time, the relative concept of oldness can certainly shift.
Yeah, sure. But it is still a bizarre. But then, what do you call those things? Like solid gold oldies, or something?
I mean, I don't have the answer for
Yeah,
you.
well-
I just have questions.
sure.
Questions?
Let
I
us
think we've
take this
digressed
moment
quite a bit.
to move on.
That Bach of consciousness is over.
That Bach of
Yeah.
conscience, that Bach of consciousness is over. Yeah.
Bach
One
means
more
stream, right?
little
That would-
tidbit.
okay, yeah.
Actually, there was a critic of J.S. Bach who made a little pun when he was first reviewing him. He said something along the lines of, "This stream has dried up."
Ah,
Oh,
so,
that's right. Yeah, yeah.
So he definitely did use the
got him.
double entendre.
He got him. Yeah.
I feel like Bach won that battle, though, or that war.
I don't even remember the reviewer's
critics.
name.
No.
Well, actually, Bach wasn't as embraced as we embrace him now until the 1800s.
Yeah, it's true.
Mendelssohn had a lot to do with it, of putting his works out into the world and making him known. Composers who knew about his stuff, and they thought, "Oh, he's the man." But he really wasn't
verbatim.
He didn't achieve as much fame during his lifetime.
He was like the Andy Kindler of his time, like the composer's composer.
He was the composer's composer. Yeah.
Yeah,
He was,
sure. I kind of
He
think,
was in a way.
or Todd Glass, if you will.
Oh yeah, I love
Todd
it.
Glass. In a way, I mean, without tooting our Weinbach name, the Brent Weinbach of.
Oh
of,
sure, why not?
I don't
Yes,
know,
but
something
he,
Or,
but
I don't know.
in fact, his sons were more.
Philip Emanuel. Carl Philip Emanuel.
Carl Philip
and
CPE Bach was more famous during his time than his father.
Wilhelm.
What?
And there was Wilhelm. Anyway,
Well, there was
we're
Johann
digress-
Christian
Yeah.
Bach too. I
Well,
think.
anyway, we're going
off.
We're deep end.
We're going off
Before we
topic.
get to our topic, sorry, I just want to mention a few station
business.
Los Angeles friends, we're bringing our show out there.
Not our podcast show,
Not
our stand-up comedy show.
Our stand-up comedy and music show, Vintage Bass with Max and Nicky. It's going to be at Dynasty Typewriter on Thursday, August 8th, 2019. And you can get tickets now at dynastytypewriter.com or just go to maxandnicky.com. We'll lead you to the right place. We got a great lineup, including James Adomian, DJ Doug Pound, Lizzie Cooperman, Kevin Kamiya, and a surprise guest.
That sounds
or
great.
two. Sure, yeah. It's going to be a fun lineup. We got some, for Los Angeles friends, we've got some new bits that you haven't seen before, some songs that you might have not seen us perform before, so it's going to be a fun one. Anyway, that's the business we have.
Business.
Let's get into it, guys.
Let's get into it. The word literally.
I'll just start off by saying, as we mentioned at the top of the show, Max and I and our friend Andrew Michon and our older brother Brent, we all hate the word literally. We really don't like it. We don't like how it's overused by everyone. In my opinion, it makes a lot of people sound like Valley Girls when
Well,
they
it
don't
just-
intend
also-
to be,
yeah.
but they also
Makes them sound inarticulate.
It's a filler word, like the word "like," that makes them sound inarticulate. But what's even worse is they are trying to sound intellectual or articulate by using the word literally.
Well, as I was thinking yesterday, I was thought it's filler masquerading as an adequate way of expressing yourself.
Can I ask a brief clarification? What if they pronounce it literally?
That's even worse. Yeah.
Okay.
And I actually think that, and by the way, I use the word actually a lot, which is also a bad word to use, and I'm trying to not use it as much. But because it's not so pervasive in our culture yet, I'm more okay with the word actually than literally.
Can I ask another question? When people say it's lit, do you get worried that they're about to continue and do the rest of the word early?
I get worried immediately because I also hate the word lit.
Sure.
Really?
What about, have you ever heard
Not
anyone
English
say
lit, though.
it's literally lit?
Oh,
That
I've
is-
heard that. I think I've heard that.
That's pretty, I haven't heard that, and so I'm pretty excited about it. I also did once, I think, tweet it's lit as a reference to a class on books. It's lit, next period, yeah.
So you like
British lit.
that I'm okay with the like.
You like
I'm
lit
taking
as short for literature? You
English
like that?
lit or something like that. That's fine with me because
I actually majored in comparative lit.
Comp lit, you might say.
Comp lit, yeah.
With an emphasis on Fred-lit.
For lit.
French?
Lit.
Yeah, Fred-lit.
And how was that class? You might say it was pretty lit, right?
I might not say
I don't
that.
think you...
I wouldn't.
You might,
You might,
but you wouldn't.
It actually wouldn't. Not even might. It was an absolute no on that.
So basically, this is the way we feel about the word literally, and we want to put an end to it, especially because
Well,
I
it's not
really
just-
do feel like
yes.
Even when people use it correctly, and it can be used correctly, it's used so much that it's as
takes
if like
away
the
from the significance of using the word.
It's as if the Kardashian culture found its way into everybody's lives without everybody realizing it.
It's not frequently used correctly. I mean, yeah, to back up and
it's more
identify
infrequently.
the misuse of it, which I feel like maybe wasn't even totally explained. You know, like
Sorry, we did not explain that.
You're not even comfortable with people who use it in a
literal way,
in the strict sense of it meaning something to like the letter of the strict truth.
I'm
right
when
they're as opposed to meaning emphatically, which is how people use it.
I'm more okay.
Absolutely, or
figuratively.
A brief example,
or figuratively. Yeah.
Let's say somebody was accidentally they dropped some like a lit match, so to speak. It's interesting that lit is in this actually because it's not even a part of what I'm about to. So somebody drops a lit match on their clothing. Their clothing are now burning, and somebody's like, "Hey, are your pants on fire?" And he says, "No." It's like your pants are literally on fire. So
and meanwhile, that person was saying something that was hyperbolic, and they thought they were being challenged about a potential lie. So like, yeah, I did go on a date with Cynthia Nixon from Sex and the City, which is a great show that you should watch the first half of every episode of. And someone was like, "Your pants are on fire." And he's like, "No, it's true." And they're like, "No, literally, dude, your pants are aflame."
Sure.
Like that. You don't like that? That's charming.
Here's the thing. I am more okay with that. But I will say that
because it's been so overused,
I can't
even
stand
in the incorrect
word.
way I mean, yes, it's more rarely used correctly actually now, but because it's so overused, I have an immediate distaste for the word. You know?
And you know what? We should all try to stop using it for a period of time, and after a while, we can reintroduce it and start using it correctly more often.
I have two things to offer. One. At least two, maybe a million. One is I read a book called Several Short Sentences on Writing or About Writing. I don't remember exactly, but several short sentences on writing. And it's written by a person named Klinkenborg is their last name. I remember
like
that.
I've heard that name.
And I really love the book. It's like there's just the book is made up of these short, informative sentences. It's a book that in the introduction, the author is a writer, and the writer is telling basically, here is how I recommend if you would like to be a writer, here are some, not rules, but like ways that you can become a better writer in my experience. And the author says, I'm not going to try to teach you how to write like me. I'm going to hopefully help you try to write like yourself. And one example in the book that the author gives is he coins the term volunteer sentences. And he says to avoid these. That is like if you're writing and something comes to you so easily, it just like rolls like right out of your mind, ready to go off the tongue. You're like, wow, what a beautiful turn of phrase. Probably be suspicious of that because it might be something that somebody else has already said.
Interesting.
And you would like to be original. So if if a sentence just volunteers itself to you and was like, hey, like I think part of what I think your issue with the word is it's like the word itself is not inherently a problem. It's the overuse, the sort of ubiquitousness of the word, which means it's like not original for any one person to use it in a certain situation. So I feel like that has something in common.
It makes our language stale. Yes.
Right. With the volunteer sentence, like, because it's not obviously the word literally is not itself a sentence, but the usage of it is sort of like, you people say it, other people hear it, and so it sort of like virally spreads through the language, which is how popular words work sometimes.
Right. I feel like I personally do have an adverse reaction to trends in general, or if this means anything at all, popular trends. If that's, I don't know if that's like a weird
I understand
expression, but
just to piggyback off that. I lost my train of thought because you interrupted me. But
I can give you my second point, which is talking about using it incorrectly is in a way funny because the fact that it has been used to mean both literally and figuratively, you may have been made aware that I believe in the Oxford
In the
English
dictionary.
Dictionary,
It does say that now.
it now is
Yes.
an official, acceptable, correct usage, which is
I think
like
that's
the way
stupid,
that
though.
language works.
Language
that
works.
They keep an eye on how language is used.
Yes.
Because if you're like, well, I don't want language to change, then we should be speaking like Shakespeare or like Chaucer or like Old English.
Yes.
And that doesn't make sense either.
You're right. Okay.
Right. I wanted to know about that also. So yeah, you guys have so there exactly. So there's like there's a prescriptive way of talking about language and a descriptive way where you describe how people actually use language.
Yeah.
And I think most people agree that some set of rules somewhere in the middle is like a rough way to like have newspapers printed and stuff. But I would love to know how you guys feel about other examples of words that are subject to this kind of change.
Like the
I was
word,
thinking
like the
about-
word actually.
I don't think I don't have an
Actually,
awareness
sorry.
of,
Actually doesn't. I'm sorry. I
No,
got
no.
confused by the question.
Okay, here I was thinking about this with the word cool even.
Sure.
I'm sure back in the day people were like, cool, I'm not feeling, cool, and they were talking about, oh no, I'm talking about it's hip, it's neat, it's cool. I don't know how, this has been so long ago, I'm sure when that was introduced into our lexicon, but I imagine people were maybe hesitant to embrace it, maybe at first. But here's my problem with the word literally, how it differs actually.
Sure.
Because to me, when you would say, like, let's say you got a piece of information from somebody and it literally came from straight from the horse's mouth, for instance, for some reason.
But
that would
that's
be
a
Mr.
weird.
Ed
that's,
talking?
Yeah, or maybe you got a piece of
That would
paper
be
that
Mr.
came
Ed
from-
talking.
Yeah.
Speaking of an old TV show
Oh,
that
yes.
we remember fondly because
I watched it on Nick at Night growing
because
up.
Nick at
Me
Night
too.
tells us that was a popular show at the time.
Okay.
Sure.
Anyway,
Well, in
we
any
did
event,
watch it on Nick
Mr.
at
Ed
Night.
whispered a secret to you.
Right.
Yeah.
What a weird show.
Yes,
It is a
very weird show.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a
was his-
weird show in an age where we all love Bojack Horseman.
Yeah, that's right.
Also a weird show and a great show.
It's funny because I immediately thought of Ren Stimpy, the horse character who says,
Who said,
"No, sir, I don't like it."
Yeah.
Anyway,
So,
I
but
was
if
saying,
you literally
if
got to,
when we used that word in the past, there was some significance when we used it because, and it clarified. It was used as to clarify. No, this actually happened to me, and it was pretty amazing that it happened. It literally got it straight from the horse's mouth. To make the distinction between our idiom or our figurative language, but now
Again, we're
because
still
it's
talking about
used
Mr. Ed.
now because it's used in both ways as a figurative way, I literally had 1,000 dates the other week. Did you literally? You had you can say it's not even in changing the inflection in the way you say it. People are saying it in the same manner. It's confusing, and that's the difference between other words.
I don't
actually.
accept the argument that it's confusing. I feel like in the
I do,
example that
'cause
you
then
just
you have to further describe, like, do you
I think
mean
in
you
the
actually
example you
had?
just gave, you'd have to be kind of a blockhead to be like, did you mean you had exactly
blockhead.
1,000
Okay,
dates the
I
other
know.
day?
Okay, but that I was using an extreme example.
I feel like
or
most of the
something.
time it's pretty clear based on context whether someone's using it in the kind of loose sense of emphatic.
No, okay. There were literally 1,000 people in the classroom, or in the auditorium. There were literally 1,000 people in the auditorium. It was a huge show for me. There were literally 1,000 people. That could be that could be figurative. That could be
Okay.
You're not being precise about it. Who knows?
That's not the way I feel about it.
I
You
like
guys-
this. I
you
want to
two have
separate
different
you
problems,
guys.
yeah.
I want
Well, this is
I
the
want to
splitting
drive the
hairs
wedge between how you two perceive the word.
Here's the
So this
thing.
is great. Let's hear this.
I was
Nicky.
watching a clip from The Daily Show, and there was a correspondent. Well, won't say who it was,
You could.
but
no.
But
Don't
they
wanna-
were talking to the host Trevor Noah, and they were talking about something.
So
I
we've
can't remember
established
what
it
was.
wasn't Trevor Noah,
And
I
they
guess.
said, these were almost the exact words they said. It was like literally gross.
I
It
think
was
that
like
sounds,
literally gross.
that sounds funny to me.
It has the filler word of like in there, and then the new filler word we feel of literally.
Or you could just say it was gross. And that could be emphatic in and of itself.
Like
It
literally
was
gross sounds like a very intentional comedic voice choice.
It wasn't intentional because it seemed that it wasn't scripted, actually.
It would have.
Actually, I'm saying actually.
I would need more context for that particular issue, but I understand where you're coming from. I feel along the lines of like the originality, like if everyone is saying it,
Yes.
then it's not that it loses meaning, but that it is easy, it is boring, it is something that, like, if you want to be more poetic, more unique, in your own art, and also in like the lost art of conversation. And that's a thing there. That's a volunteer sentence. I didn't make up the lost art of conversation, right? The found art of new conversation. And so I understand your desire to not have everyone saying literally as much as possible all the time. And I think obviously the thing that you can do to help the vision that you foresee, that your desires, your ideals for the world moving forward of everyone doing it less, is obviously like being the change that you would like to see in the world,
Sure.
and you yourselves doing your best to
And
avoid
actively
saying it.
actively talking about
I don't
it.
want to. I also don't want to put that the perception out there that we're averse to change in language. I'm open to that completely. It is a big part of it is, yes, the staleness that comes with overuse, and part of it actually what does annoy me too is that it's not only that, it's that when people do use the word literally, they feel that they are being not just adequate, but also proficient in their description, actually.
If I may, I'll say when your description of the person who said, or yours, whoever said it was literally gross.
Like
literally
gross.
Like literally. I think, in some ways, literally has come to mean very.
Emphatically, that's exactly what it means. Yeah.
Absolutely.
They said it was like very gross.
Yes.
Which sounds weird and
But
also.
yeah,
right?
like doesn't add anything meaning-wise to it. So let's say
That's why I'm even more accepting of the word like than literally. Go ahead. Sorry.
Interesting. Oh yeah. So I would say we are undergoing like a paradigm shift in which there are people like my grandmother was a grammar teacher, or that actually is something that I say, but she was a grade school teacher. She taught many things, including grammar. And so when I have a joke about it where I say she's a grammar teacher for sake of ease, but I'm glad that I could complicate it here for all of us. My grandmother one time said to me when I said this was like really fun or very fun, and she told me that fun was a noun and couldn't be modified with an adverb.
Really?
But to me, fun is also like, this is a fun activity. Fun can be an adjective,
yeah.
but going back, there's sort of this, there's no defined lines of when things switch part of speech or switch what they mean, because there's so many, however many English speakers or how many speakers of the language there are at a given time. There are generations, and then there are cultures and subcultures, and so much change in our language. Like new terms get introduced. Like certainly there's a lot of people in certain communities, like the hip hop community introduces a lot of new terms.
Sure,
like,
they
the
do.
way that Shakespeare used to, perhaps, or
the same way that jazz hipsters used to back in the day.
Cool, the word cool.
And it's interesting because when you brought up cool, I thought about the way that some people now, self-included, will sometimes for fun, and I think this is another volunteer sentence.
For fun.
Anyway. Example of like cool. Like that. I don't know who the first person to say cool that many times in a row was for fun, humorous, artistic effect, but a lot of people do it now because I think that's what it starts as some combination of fun and or useful. Either it is initially communicating something in a way, whether for emphasis or for a humorous, poetic, some sort of delivery or effect. It starts that way, and then like everyone isn't coming up with their own unique lingo and jargon all the time. We're sort of sponges. We see people, this person said this in a song, this person said this in a comedy act. There's certain people come up with, sticky terms, sticky usages, and it's sort of, so whoever did it, and it might not have been a single person, sort of like the way that when birds are flying and then, they're in a a V pattern, and then one of them, they start turning, and they all turn kind of at the same time because they're all sensing who's turning around them. That's sort of what society is doing linguistically.
Sure.
And so it's just that there is this preponderance of people doing it. And I think it's funny because I'm not even sure if having this conversation here there might be people listening who are like, yeah, I'd like to try to not say it as frequently because I don't want to be as stale. I don't want to be just a follower of the crowd. I'd like to be more unique and original and speak my own literal mind as much as I can. What about literal? Are you okay with literal more?
No, I'm not.
Fair enough.
Same thing. Same
yeah.
thing. Oh, I'm okay with that. Sorry. I was just
going to say though we were talking about how in the Oxford Dictionary that it means the precise definition of it and also the figurative.
Yes.
It also does mean they also added the extra definition of it meaning emphatically or absolutely definitely. I looked that up as well.
That's reasonable.
Sorry, I wanted to piggyback off what we were saying because
people use it that way.
Ultimately, that what you're saying, I think it's kind of missing the point of what I'm saying. Is I'm okay, as much as it pains me to say, I'm more okay with expressions like that was lit or that was fire. As much as I hate them, I'm more okay with them because those are, in a way.
Literally is different than slang. Yeah, literally is not in the same category as slang.
Literally is not. Yeah,
but it is still. But a way we start to speak and we start to
it's like an indie comedian,
follow each other and how we do.
It's like an indie comedian breaking through. Like there might have been people using it in ways like in the way that it's used mainstream,
right.
like in smaller subcultures initially, but then our moms started doing it.
Right.
Our moms,
it's funny you see your moms because I was watching one of those Hollywood Reporter roundtable discussions with like actors, and some of my favorite. Moms. Actors were moms. Some of my favorite moms. Some of my favorite actors were on it. Like Ted Danson was in this roundtable discussion.
Sure.
Don Cheadle and I can't remember who else. But
Ted Danson. Did you say
Ted Danson first started using in this discussion, and I notice he uses it a lot. As any interview I listen to him in, he says the word. He says literally too to try to sound smarter, and he says it so much
that when
and everybody
really,
in the circle. At a point, Sacha Baron Cohen, even who I think is a genius, he even was starting to use
British.
It's a contagious word. And
I think all words are, and you're now particularly attuned to this one, so now you're especially going to notice it whenever it happens. But for sure, if we have a conversation, one of us uses a word, then I almost said earlier, like, and I'm going to piggyback on what you said because you put piggyback into my head.
Sure.
And so that happens.
The idea that older people are doing it, like, I'm sorry, Ted Danson, that you are
He's older.
You are older. He was around a time, or he's lived a long life, and back before literally was used so ubiquitously, he wasn't using it before, and so the idea that this popular word has seeped into his almost subconscious, and he's saying it without knowing he's actually doing it, and he's doing it a lot, is I don't know. I see a problem there for me at least. But we haven't asked you guys yet what your opinion is
on it.
We've talked about it. We've described the usage of it, but I actually want to know what your opinions are of it, of the word literally.
Here's what I'll say. First, I think a thing I was saying earlier, I'm going to just add a second point to when I said there might be people listening who resonate with this, who are like, yeah, your point is good. I wish this would happen. And maybe like I'll stop doing it. I'll tell other people to stop using it. And maybe we can get to a place where people aren't doing it as much. But also it's possible that the opposite could be. There might be people listening that are like, I've never even thought of that. Not even a problem. I'm going to use it more. Like even just having the conversation might perpetuate more of the use of it by drawing attention.
I've done that in the past too, where I've kind of wanted to stand my ground and I'm just a rebel. Really without a cause, I guess.
And so to answer your
literally
to answer
without
your
a cause.
Yeah. to answer your question of how I feel about it, before I came on the show and before you told me that this would be the topic, I certainly wasn't thinking about it as much as you were. So I would say that I wasn't noticing it as much as you were.
I almost thought you were going to say, I thought about it intensely.
But I mean, it is certainly something that I feel like in comedy, I remember David Cross's first album, Shut Up You Fucking Baby. It was like a double album that came out in maybe the early 2000s, I think. I know there was a joke about 9/11, so it was soon after that. It was maybe, sometime in the, maybe 2003 or something. And he had a joke about sort of attacking people for using literally, quote unquote, incorrectly.
Yeah.
It was somebody said, I think they literally shit their pants or something.
Right.
But they didn't. I think they said it was like, that was so funny, I literally shit my pants. And then David Cross's character is like, what did you do with the pants? And they're like, what? He's like, if you literally shit. So I feel like this is something that you are, you're addressing now that I certainly have. At that point also, I wasn't like, oh my God, David Cross is naming a phenomenon that I have never seen or never thought about. I thought he did it in a funny way that I wasn't even really, if I was a comedian at that point, I hadn't been doing it for that long. I'm like, oh, that's a funny joke, and I hadn't heard that joke done at that point. But so since then, I feel like I would love to see stats on.
Sure.
I know there's, the Daily Show and other shows use technology to find clips where people are saying the same phrases,
they have a technology for that. It's not just a researcher.
Yes, I learned, I forget what it's called, but I think it might have been created or invented for specifically shows like maybe actually the Daily Show, and then every other show has access to it now, or they pay for use of it.
Yeah.
It's a program where you don't have to watch all the news, but you can just input a search term, and then they'll deliver to you all of the examples of people, in whatever time frame using that term. So I would love to see, obviously we can't search all of reality, all of the English-speaking world, but we could, it could be searched.
We could search all of Ted Dance's interviews.
Yes, and we could search media. It could search the news. It could search, TV, whatever.
Google
TV
Trends
shows.
does this. You can look up word usage over time on,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And so I would love to see how its frequency has changed over the course of the last 10, 20, however many years. That would be a really interesting thing, because for me, I would say I certainly don't have as much of, I will say, number one, I don't have as much of a problem with it as you do. I would say I even don't have a problem with it. Not that I'm not sympathetic to your emotional reaction. And I'm sure that also there are larger things in the world that it isn't that you care
you're
about.
Not sympathetic, or you are?
I am sympathetic. I'm sympathetic to your emotional reaction, because I also presume that this is not the only thing in the world that you're like this. You're not like, this is once this is fixed, then the world is fine.
No,
there are certainly other things, and perhaps this is even like an enjoyable distraction.
This is the crux of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Yes.
Is the word literally.
And so I think that I am on a path through my life. I studied linguistics in grad school, and I studied philosophy and psychology in undergrad. And I used to love, and still do love, but I used to love learning about the rules of grammar in English and other languages, and diagramming
Which is one of the
sentences.
reasons we had you on the episode, because we knew you're very much into language. Anyway,
and I appreciate it. And so I feel like I used to.
I didn't even know that you studied linguistics. Just based on your comedy.
Understood.
I just assumed that there was some sort of connection.
Or based on my emails with you.
Yes.
Right. That's right.
So here's a thing that I've talked about on stage a little bit, but also just a real story about my childhood. One time, my dad was a teacher, and I was a kid, and I was off from school, and I went in. It was right before the holidays in December, and I went into school with him to just hang out with my dad while he was working the last couple days of his school. And another teacher saw me and said Merry Christmas, and I said I'm Jewish, and I feel like that I call myself in my act in the past a douchebag. I think that's not a way. If somebody says Merry Christmas to me today as an adult, I say
Interesting.
thank you or also Merry Christmas.
Right.
And also to you. Like,
Right.
because I understand in fact, the spirit of what they're wishing me is kindness.
Yeah.
And not the letter, as in literal, of they're not like, I demand that you have Christmas like I do. Because I also, I love various things about the holiday season, the Christmas season, giving, the song, like there's so many things.
The music.
But I was definitely much more rule oriented as a kid. And I feel like a lot of, maybe not every kid, but a lot of kids are, because like you learn rules and you're like, now we apply the rules. And when they're broken or not followed by adults or by people in certain situations, you're like, hey, you're doing this wrong. And there's a lot of like conflation of wrong when something is wrong technically, like in grammar, and wrong like ethically and morally. And some people think there's certainly people who are like, it's wrong to, to use the wrong fork etiquette wise. And that's like, I have a friend, a woman whose grandmother's like a high society, like debutante type lady. And her family tells her, she's like, you should laugh less loudly because it's unbecoming of a lady. Like it's wrong to do that in a way that I would think has more of a moral content to it.
Sure.
And so
it's funny you say that because, just sorry to interject real quick, is I was a server for many years. And,
yes.
And I don't even drink. I've never been drunk in my life. But if I see somebody serve a bottle of wine incorrectly, it bothers me. And I don't even know why. It's just ingrained in my head how you're supposed to correctly do it. And I don't like seeing when it's done. When somebody puts the bottle of wine on the table before opening it or even before serving the wine, it bothers me.
But it doesn't bother you on like a moral, ethical level.
No,
you don't think that they are a quote unquote
on a technical
bad,
level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about here is all aesthetics.
Sure.
And I do think it's fun to like the same way that like playing a game is fun, where you're trying to win, not because you think that you are better in some way, inherently than the friends that you're playing the game with, but because you're like, given the rules of the game, we're all going to try to like play the game and have fun. And also somebody's going to win the game if it's that kind of game. And so I feel like this is like, as long as there's some people for whom the game of grammar is like, it's a game. This is a game.
Sure.
And it's fun. And the rules are always changing. And I think it is a matter of aesthetics. It's definitely not a matter of ethics. Like right now, nobody is in any danger from how much we use the word literally. It would be fun to find a literal example of somebody that's like, there's literally a lion coming towards you. It's like, we're all trying. That would be like a funny example to find if that could be searched for. But it seems like that would be the outlier, the exception, as opposed to the rule, which is just the aesthetic taste. Yeah. And a thing that I've been striving to do more in my own life is focus on the things that I like and the things that I want to do, and like the attention, obviously not to ignore the negative things. Obviously there are problems, there are ethical problems in the world. There's suffering and injustice. And those are things I love to focus on, like helping fix negative, moral issues, but so for me now, I'm focusing less on the aesthetic because these are things that I think
you can't change ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, I'll strive to live the way that I want to live, and if there's a thing that I'm like, certainly there are things that would strike my taste, the palate of my ear in a way that I'm like, I wouldn't say that, so I won't say that, but I won't tell other people not to say it, and I won't even tell you not to tell people not to say it. I'm like, everyone, like, as long as you're not hurting anyone, go for it. But I do, so I'm sympathetic to your cause, but I'm on the outskirts of it.
Interesting.
I don't.
Hold on. I'm sorry. We haven't heard from Kevin on this.
But just to piggyback off what you're saying, just to finish that thought. I wouldn't ever in public tell people how they should say something.
If I know them well enough.
Unless I know them well. I mean, then I'll be like, come on, you can use that. But, people can say however they want.
Even then, it depends on, the kind of emotional response that the person that you're close with might have, usually to mentioning something that would correct their grammar.
Well, it's not even correcting.
Because we've done that with certain friends with your and your. Which bothers me too,
But you correct friends who like write in writing who mix up your and your? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, or even a worse, and this is a subject
In
for
like an informal text or something, you'd correct him?
Yeah, I might. Yeah, maybe not an informal text, but because it might have completed the word "your." But even a worse example would be the use of the word "I" incorrectly, and that's maybe a
Like
topic
just
for another
between you
episode.
and I, that kind of thing.
I think
Just
it's
you
called
and I-
hyper-urbanism.
But that's the same thing. I think "I" can be applied to the same thing that we're talking about literally in the sense that people try to sound smarter by saying "I."
There's a certain amount of pretension, I feel, when using the word.
contexts, even when you're not supposed to be using the word "I," and it makes them sound more stupid or ignorant. Actually,
If I may respond to this briefly, I think the term that I've heard for this is hypercorrection. So
Hypercorrection.
so for example,
Yeah, that's probably what it's called. Yeah.
like when you're growing up, let's say as a kid, if you say me and him went to the store, your teacher or an adult will probably say, oh, it's he and I. So in that situation, we don't say me, we say I.
Right.
And so I would say that there's a lot of people who are not trying.
Aware.
They're not trying to sound smart. They're trying to
They're just being
not
colloquial.
do the wrong thing,
Yeah.
but they are over applying the rule of, oh, this is is this a situation where I usually would say me. So it's like it's double. They're tricking themselves. It's like the scene in Princess Bride. Like, oh, did I put the wine in front of me or I?
it's funny because I would rather them always use me because it sounds more conversational, and I
It doesn't
prefer-
sound as though that they're trying.
Yeah, it's just
basically.
anyway. Sorry,
Yes.
Kevin.
No, not I mean,
Literally.
What are your
I
feelings?
sometimes accidentally do this with the word bagel because I'm from the upper Midwest and was raised to pronounce like one syllable that ends in ag as egg, like flag or bag. And so in trying to kind of cleanse my accent, hyper-corrected and turning everything into ag. And so sometimes I will accidentally say bagel because of hyper-correction.
Really?
So not usually. Most of the time I nail it. I really am. You grew up stick the landing. But
So to clarify, you grew up saying bagel. Or how did you say
I
it?
didn't eat bagels growing up.
Okay.
I don't know.
But you would have, if you looked at that word, would you?
Sure,
You would have said bagel.
bagel, yep.
But you're like, there are other words that look the same, but you would have said it differently.
Right.
And what's an example of one's? Because I didn't recognize the other words.
Flag for flag.
Oh,
bag for bag.
FLAG?
I would bring
Oh.
my bag to the store. Because I used to. I didn't quite talk this bad, but like sometimes I would say, "Well, I got this bag here," and
I gotcha. BAG. You would
It's a
say
bag, and
so you
so-
look at bagel and you're like, oh, gotta correct
bagel.
it. Bagel.
Exactly. That's a bag. Right.
But I
Weird.
kind of like that as that's something endearing, actually. It's a
Right.
very
And
good-
these are all
Why
things.
accents can be, I think, are more endear. I mean,
because that is unique and specific to that person.
yeah,
actually.
and you
That's
can't.
what-
It's
A quick thing
Sorry.
about this. There's I think when I went to school in Boston, a friend from the Midwest who pronounced it more bagel. They were somewhere that they pronounced it bagel. They wanted just a plain bagel. They ordered a bagel, and at that place, B''EGGEL was like a bagel with an egg on it. So they received like an egg sandwich.
Oh, that's
on
too
a-
perfect.
on a bagel.
Oh my god!
They were like, I just wanted a bagel, and they're like, yes, that's the sandwich that we
that's
call
the
a bagel.
bagel.
Yeah.
I hated. We had a friend growing up who pronounced the word pillow. He would say pillow.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
And that annoyed us. Anyway,
Flag. I love it. What
Anyway,
a flagrant violation of our rules.
that's funny.
Anyway, Kevin,
I don't wanna go on a flag
what are
rant,
your opinions on?
Yeah, no, I don't
Use
know.
of
I mean,
the
I
word
think
literally.
this has been an interesting discussion that's been very, very rich. There's a lot of
Has it
stuff
been
going on.
eye-opening
Pick a
for
side,
you?
Kevin.
Well, no, I will.
No, you don't. Pick a side and we're gonna argue against
I appreciate your sentiment, Mike. That
Thank
that it
direct that
is. It's certainly not like a hot button issue for me. In
We
church.
like to
It's not
discuss
something
the
that bothers
mundane
me.
and,
Of
and
course.
really
Our podcast is
nitpick
about
out.
picking apart the trivial.
And we were talking about the distinction between it being an aesthetic judgment versus a moral judgment. And I actually think that language is inherently inflected with values. And so I do think that there are interesting, quiet, ethical reactions embedded in how we react to how people talk.
Sure.
And and I think literally might be an example of that. I think literally is an interesting an interesting word. I think it's a gendered word for sure. I mean, you used the phrase Valley Girl and Kim Kardashian, and you didn't reveal the gender of that Daily Show critic or Daily Show correspondent.
It would be funny if it was a critic and they were the one who criticized Bach and
That would be
said
funny.
that was the stream that dried up.
Yeah. Well, let's not reveal the gender. How about
no,
that?
Go for that. Do whatever.
I won't reveal the but it's I'm sorry. It's funny because the term Valley Girl is so ingrained in my head, but in this day and age, would that be an offensive thing to say? I mean,
I'm not offended at all. I'm just suggesting, and who am I to say? I'm just suggesting that I think that, I certainly find myself walking around hearing people talk in New York. Everyone talks very differently. And if you try to dig into some of the reactions you have to what sounds familiar or unfamiliar how, or what resonates well or differently or however, I think you can kind of polish off some value judgments in there and how you react to the things people say and how they talk. And I certainly for a long time have thought of literally as a kind of gender inflected language trend.
Really interesting.
Sure. Would you say that's not something
You thought that more females you would use that more?
I would say it's it scans female. It scans as a gendered woman thing. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that because I had mentioned that roundtable discussion
Ted
with
Danson.
all male actors.
Right. And I'm not saying exclusively at all.
Right, but
certainly,
maybe at its origin, you in your mind you thought it maybe was more.
I can see how you would
prevalent
think,
amongst
I can see why you would
females.
say
I mean,
that.
in the same way that plenty of women would use the word dude in the California style, I would say dude scans.
I don't think
I think dude scans is a male expression,
I see.
in spite of the fact that many women might use it.
These days, maybe more evening out because of Broad City's dude popularity from woman to woman as well.
I think Broad City is a good example of a cultural artifact that really intentionally kind of undermines a lot of gender inflection in vernacular language.
Can I want to respond to the thing you're saying about the values and the judgments that we have to the things that we hear. Of course, as human beings, we react to the things in our environment. I haven't really said anything yet, but in my linguistic studies, we discussed an experiment they did at 3 department stores, I believe in New York City. And I think the aim was to have one high end, one, inexpensive, and one midway. So I think it was Saks Fifth Avenue and Macy's and Woolworths at the time, in maybe the 50s or something, whenever this was being done, maybe the 60s. And they would go into each of these places and they would ask an employee for something that was found on the 4th floor. And then they would say, where are the linens? And then it sort of broke down by class. They're because it would be a higher paid set of workers working at the higher end store than at the lower paid people at the lower end store. And the lower the pay grade, the more likely it would be for someone to have the accent 4th floor, kind of a New York, a Brooklyn, could be a Boston, which is interesting because there's nothing inherently classed about that pronunciation, because also that's the British pronunciation, which is sometimes also fourth floor. That could be, I'm not doing a great job, but
4th floor.
Dropping the R is a thing that is done in high British society, as well as
nothing to FIA, but FIA itself.
Well, I think that's the evolution of the English language, is that
I'm sure
people
that
landed in the
Americans
East Coast.
were influenced by the British.
The further west you get, the less of an accent there is, I think.
And so the point of the experiment was they would also then sometimes pretend like they hadn't heard. And so then they would say, oh, what was that again? And then very frequently, if someone had said 4th floor without the R's, they would then enunciate further, as though the same way, there's code switching where people will speak one way, so let's say in their community.
That movie that came out recently, what's it called? The Bootsy. What was it called?
Boots Riley film?
Oh
Boots
yeah,
Riley film.
yeah, the one about the phone.
Yeah.
The phone voice.
Yeah, the
Sorry
phone
to bother
voice.
you.
Yes.
Sorry to bother you. Yeah.
And so people are aware, like the people who worked at Woolworths were aware that, maybe they didn't understand me, or maybe I would be being judged. Like they became self-conscious. But it's interesting because like the judgments that we put on the language isn't about. The judgment isn't about the language. The judgment is about like the people. The judgment is ultimately potentially more about us. And like I'm also like I'm not immune to like my goal is to not judge, and it's very difficult because also being like I try not to judge is also like being judgy of the concept of judging. Like I try not to judge judgers even, and I'm like I'm judging myself because if I'm judging, then I'm judging myself for judging.
But isn't it funny when you do run into somebody who truly seems like they would never judge anybody, or it just seems like, wow, this person is the nicest person. Anyway.
I think it sometimes comes off as someone being unthinking when I encounter a person who seems like incapable of critically assessing stuff around them.
I actually think
people should be discerning and...
I think it comes across as
okay.
somebody who genuinely finds the good in somebody despite maybe what problems lie there.
And the way it comes across is more about the person receiving it, that because we can never know what's going on inside of another person. It really mostly only tells us about ourselves, which is why like when I certainly notice all the time when people use the incorrect your or their or me or whatever it is. But I'm glad to be in a place now where for myself, like I think I sort of wrote as a joke once the idea of like a conversation between somebody's like you did the wrong thing by using the wrong your, and I'm like, well, you did the wrong thing by telling me. It's right. I think it's a worse breach of etiquette to correct someone under certain circumstances than it is to accidentally use the quote unquote incorrect term, which is why, just to go back and say, I certainly don't think that you guys are going around telling people on the streets like this crusade is important and we need to.
No, I am.
Of course not.
And I'm also not accusing you of bad politics for focusing on the word literally. I was genuinely excited to be here, and I wasn't trying to like call out anything. I think this is a super interesting topic.
I never actually
here's the thing.
interpreted it that way.
Who's upset?
Great.
But again, that is maybe your...
I'm genuinely upset.
But you're also... when you said that you were focusing on the politics of it, you had a preconception that it was political, actually, that he thought about it as a female thing or engendered, the word.
Well, it's
literally.
interesting
whether conscious or not, I still presume that that's right.
It's
Yeah.
interesting
but
you say that.
and you said that partially because he said Valley Girl in the beginning. Now, to me, when he said Valley Girl as an umbrella term for the kind of language that is spoken in the Valley in Los Angeles County, that has. It's like I'm saying like a lot. People say like a lot, and that is ubiquitous throughout the country now. It started there, though.
And by the way, the Kardashians are I believe from the Valley, right? Or
right.
maybe they.
So it wasn't. To me, because Nicky said that the words Valley Girl. I mean, obviously there's a gender there, but what he meant by that was not to place any emphasis on gender. It's more just those people from the Valley, because they're constantly using filler words like or
well, it is
literally
like it's a stereotype of their accent,
right? It's more about they're incapable. They're not being capable of articulating themselves.
It's funny because
or in a more diverse way. I guess.
I have been in situations where I've overheard, and I really hate when people kind of trash talk Los Angeles, because we're from that city, and I love that city, and
love that city.
Right.
And they
it's like literally awesome.
They talk about it in such a way with such disdain, almost as if they've never truly explored that city. And while they're talking about it, they use words like literally in incorrect ways, and they'll use them very frequently, and it'll make them sound like the thing that they are making fun of or trash talking. And I thought to myself, sometimes they'll attack the people in Los Angeles, and I think, well, you're no different from them. They're good and bad people everywhere, and you speaking in such a manner, I can't really tell the difference between you and somebody from Los Angeles or Seattle, because you're all going to be talking in that way. And I guess that you're talking about sort of the evolution of language and how these words get, they come into our vernacular, and eventually everybody's going to start using the word literally, and we're not going to know that it may have sounded like a Valley Girl type of thing in the past, or to me it did. At a certain point, it'll just be commonplace. Maybe, hopefully not.
Can I ask,
it already is commonplace.
I have a couple questions that are kind of parenthetical. One, do you guys have attitudes or feelings about? I don't mean that.
They
feelings.
do.
Yeah, they sure do. About the ending a sentence in an up thing. Like when people make statements like, I kind of could go for some ice cream.
No, I like that.
No, I don't.
But I will say this: I've always, I
think it's funny.
Out of all the
it's
acting classes I've taken, I've always been taught to introduce yourself not by going up, by going down. So
my name is Kevin Crooks.
Yeah, you want to say my name is Kevin Crooks because it sounds more assertive and confident.
I believe Brent has a joke that I love and think of frequently, where he talks about how some people will pick up the phone and say hello. And then other people, he's like, I don't do that. I pick up the phone and I say, hello, because you don't question the phone.
Sure.
You answer the phone.
Oh, that is a funny.
That's great. I love
wow,
that.
I haven't heard that one in a long time.
That's a good one.
And then that sort of, I think about that sometimes when I'm talking to people about how when I started doing comedy, I was less confident with, let's say, what jokes I had that were funny. I didn't know as well how to be the comedian that I would become because I hadn't done that work and had that experience yet. So I felt like in the beginning, I was more asking jokes. I was like, is this a joke? As opposed to later, like not asking jokes, but telling jokes. So
interesting. That's a very interesting way of looking at comedy. At comedy?
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello. I feel like I often will say hello if I'm getting an unknown number, actually.
Of course, because it means, hello, who is
Who
this?
is this?
What's happening?
It's implying the whole rest of the thing that
It's
you don't
funny
even
when
need to say.
if my older brother or sister call, I'll always answer. Maybe I'll go hello, or something like that.
Sure.
Where it's.
I think people are saying hello too much. I want to get that out of the language.
People are not saying goodbye enough, though. I often am
Ooh, I
talking.
hung up on you today without saying goodbye.
They're all just,
Did you notice that?
I don't know if I noticed that, but
Okay. As soon as I did it, I was like, oh, I should have said goodbye.
Well, we talk with Brent on the phone pretty much every night, and he. For those of you
Brent,
that don't know,
our
Brent
older
is
brother
our
and
older
a
brother,
stand-up comedian,
who's a
Brent
stand-up
Weinbach.
comedian. I'll say, all right, bye, and he'll just hang up and not reciprocate the
Now,
goodbye.
are you sure that you think that it's people aren't saying goodbye as much, or just the person that you talk to every night doesn't
No,
say goodbye
that's the
as
only
much?
person in
Yeah.
my life, really. So people, I don't know. I know maybe you're right. I don't know. Maybe I'm generalizing
Also,
based
is
on
it-
one person.
Is it Brent who's the one who's saying literally all the time? And
No,
Brent is.
We
He's
actually
actually the one
established. We
responsible for
established
all of it.
Actually, there I go again with actually. Brent wants to do a sketch on this with Andrew Michon, and he wants to write something and talk about the word literally, or not talk about it, but maybe portray it somehow. Because
Sure.
Of
Wait,
the dislike
Kevin,
of-
just to be sure. Now, you did describe when we were talking about literally, you were saying that it has some inherent ethical values attached to it, or
There's a political charge.
there's a political
in some way.
charge.
That's a
but
good
you
way of
still
putting
didn't
it.
describe what your actual opinion is on it. You're just describing what you feel is attached
and
to it.
maybe you
but
don't
Sure,
have.
and
Maybe
this
you
is-
maybe you don't
it,
lean
actually.
one way or the other.
And
I
this is, I guess, actually was going to be the other thing I was going to remark on as a parenthetical question. Is I'm fine with the word literally. I do not. I relate to what Mike was describing in terms of being more rule bound as a younger language learner, and then kind of letting those.
Oh yeah, we could be different.
Disintegrate a little bit. And I have I tend not to have many pet peeves in general. I definitely don't have many language pet peeves. And I think one of the biggest reasons I don't
Really,
is
glitter's not a pet peeve of yours, like mine.
Come
Like
again?
Glitter is not a pet peeve of yours, like it is for me.
I don't like the material of glitter. I don't think of that as a pet peeve.
I'm joking. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
I do think glitter is I literally was in a meeting at work today.
Literally
For
He
sure.
was glitterally in a.
I was in a meeting today with my boss, and I said that I thought glitter was horrifying. Someone was telling a story about something called a glitter party, which I had never heard of.
That sounds awful.
Yeah, that's what I said. I said that sounds like fucking hell on earth. That sounds horrible. But sorry if you guys don't swear on this podcast.
Can I ask a quick question to sort of maybe draw out some of your opinion for what I got from when you were saying, like, whether or not it is gendered, whether or whether it was at one point or perhaps is now, because I also didn't initially think when you brought up the topic, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a thing that many people of all genders are capable of and manifest or will manifest or non-binary fest into the world. But I also, it does ring like your assessment does ring true that there certainly is, if not literally every Valley resident, even to say the fact that there is a stereotype of the Valley girl as, which I think is at least
And a Valley boy. I should just say Valley boy too.
But Valley boy isn't.
It's not
a word.
Isn't
Nobody
as
says
common a
no,
phrase.
you
So I
don't
think
say
that there is like an inherent, like you guys, like we're all part of the patriarchy. We're not being purposefully like sexist by perpetuating, whether they're tropes that are sexist or gendered in a way. But because this is something that Kevin, you've expressed, you are at least aware of, if not sensitive to. In this case, given this analysis, like, would you say that you would like to not be like, if you were to say, okay, so it's more of a thing that women are doing, and so for me as a man to say we should stop it would be in a way paternalistic that you wouldn't want to do?
Sure, yeah, potentially. And I would say even just a little more abstracted than that. Like, I just think I agree that I encounter people, men and women both using it. And I've seen like t-shirts online that make jokes about using it incorrectly. It's a widespread thing that I don't mean to isolate too much as too gendered. But I think the scrutiny that it has undergone is, I think, potentially has a gendered aspect to it. And I think
scrutiny by us.
in this example, but also just more broadly,
There is
culturally,
broad cultural scrutiny.
There's broad cultural scrutiny,
broad
and there are
city
all
cultural
sorts of
scrutiny.
ways. There's broad city cultural scrutiny, and there are all sorts of aspects of language that are changing all the time, being used in different ways. The word peruse used to mean
To read
very
thoroughly,
carefully,
yeah.
and then evolved to mean read in kind of a scanning way. And, just all sorts of like small language things, and the things that catch fire and get a lot of scrutiny, I think sometimes can get that scrutiny for a reason. And the biggest reason I try not to I don't think I constitutionally can let myself get too hung up on language pet peeves is the terror that I'm sure I'm saying stuff wrong all the time. And I can't imagine living in a world where someone as like nasty and critical as I can be when I'm being nasty and critical would be unleashed on how I talk, because I would never say it. I find it hard to talk as it is because
Or you're doing a great job.
Thanks so much. But no, it's really it really is about the laying down the rules seems really scary to me. That kind of authority, asserting that kind of authority.
Sure.
It's
funny you say
something
that
I'd be comfortable with.
Because we were performing a show before, and I was posed with a problem where I had used the word "I," and I wasn't sure in the moment if I was using it correctly or not. And I thought I thought about it on stage out loud, and I was like, "Am I doing this right?" And my older brother later on said, "No, you were wrong. You shouldn't have used I." And I thought, no, I think I should have. And so it was the kind of thing where, if you're constantly questioning yourself, you might end up nowhere, because you might get to a point where you're like, I don't even know how I should be speaking at
Because
this point.
the spirit of your of communicating is like, it exists.
Right.
In whether you said I or me in that situation. Like Kevin shared about the difference between like prescriptive and descriptive linguistics, or the study of grammar in those terms. Like, whatever you say naturally is in one sense correct, because it is the way, like, we all learned to speak without being taught rules. We learned through listening to people around us. We learned from our family, from other people in our schools, our environments, from media. Way before we got to class and they said, now whom in this situation, and don't end sentences like this. Yeah. So in that moment, whatever you said naturally is like, obviously when you like, when you go to a job interview, you might think more cautiously about what you're going to say and how than when you're not at a job interview. And when you're writing a resume, like writing is certainly like operates under many different rules than like if you were to transcribe this conversation, as opposed to if we were to all have it in writing, there would be a lot of glaring, like, you knows and likes.
Sure,
and
is another one.
And everyone knows,
Yeah. Sure.
And so I think that whether or not you quote unquote got it right, like definitely it's the quote unquote wrongest thing to just be paralyzed by it in the moment, because that way you're not doing the thing you're trying to do, which is communicate.
Well, but it added for comedic effect that he was paralyzed.
Yes.
So in that sense, it actually aided in the comedy.
In a way, it is very much our personalities to be paralyzed on stage about such a trivial thing.
So I know.
Yes.
So you judging that quality about him is judging him. No, I'm kidding.
Are you guys familiar with the Gricean maxims?
Why does that ring a bell?
Or the Gricean's Nickyums?
Which could have been
By the way, we
Gricean
should-
Michaelisms.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, if things
I
had
won't go
changed.
into it too deeply, which is good because I don't always remember. There's 4 of them, but this guy Grice came up with these maxims, which basically described how people communicate. And like one of them is the maxim of quality, and the maxim of quantity, the maxim of relevance, and maybe the maxim of manner. I think there's something like that if you the idea is that in most standard conversation between two people, not talking about entertainment, like often a lot of humor comes from confounding and like conflating the rules, because like the joke, like how many months have 28 days? All of them is the answer, but the implication of the sentence is...
I would have said February just now, yeah.
That is because the Gricean maxim of one of them, whatever it is, like makes it so like, oh yeah, of course, how many months have only 28 days? Because why else would I be asking if all of them have 28 days only for comedic, effect?
It's like isosceles and... God, well, I can't even think of the other triangle anymore, but...
Obtuse?
No,
equal.
Equilateral. Yeah,
why did I forget that word?
That's
anyway,
fine. Oh yeah, so I'd say just for your own enjoyment and or edification, check out Grice's maxims, because those are things that, like, when I say
only Grice's Nicky M's for me.
You for the whichever ones you like, and so just the idea of communicating in a non-comedic fashion. One of the goals is to be as concise as possible. One of the goals when you're communicating in a comedic fashion, you put more emphasis on like the manner and less on like we got to get. I mean, sometimes obviously there are still like good ideas for having a shorter joke than a longer
absolutely,
joke,
absolutely.
But
absolutely.
also valuing being in the moment and like living in that paralysis for comedic effect is certainly you didn't do the wrong thing.
Right.
That's all.
I just do want to make a distinction.
And do you want this to be the last?
Oh yeah, this is my
thing?
final thought. I don't think
right?
there's necessarily. I mean, I don't think this isn't like a huge, big problem for us in everyday society. And I don't know. I guess I want to disagree with you guys a little bit.
Fair.
Is that everyone has small little gripes with things. I think that's okay to have. Whether or not I'm like super concerned with it or not, people do notice things, and I think I don't necessarily agree that there is a gender attached to the word literally, because I hear it. I may even hear it more from males actually than females. And
you're listening to men more than you're listening to women?
No, actually, that's you actually taking what I said. Actually,
well, no, he's obviously
for
joking.
comedic purposes.
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it's
Everyone's
interesting.
kidding?
It's funny you're saying that, because there are probably more male stand-up comedians than female stand-up comedians.
It does seem so.
And
historically, at least.
Right. And you could, for instance, be annoyed with sirens. I hate sirens. They're so loud, but they're absolutely necessary. And the reason they're annoying is to get
the women singers from the
they're absolutely necessary.
This is all about
entrap Odysseus.
But it is an absolute. In this case, it's absolutely necessary that it be annoying, because it needs to get people the hell out of the way.
Yes.
So that's
but
that's
it's still
the case
nevertheless.
of the word literally.
I cringe when I hear it. It's annoying. You know, what can I say?
Can I offer you a thing that makes me think of, which is I like you, Kevin. I like you, Kevin. And I, like you, Kevin, I strive to not think about having pet peeves. And so sometimes when I talk about having pet peeves, like I sometimes say like, one of my pet peeves would be, if I had pet peeves, the idea of having pet peeves. So if I were to have a pet peeve, in addition to having pet peeves, which I don't want to have because I don't have pet peeves, but would be honking. And I like to put myself through all of that because I don't like to talk about the things that bother me when they're not happening as much as possible, except for, you know, the purpose of communicating in this way. Because I feel like when you brought up
It'd be great if
sirens,
somebody honked right now.
for me, for me, honking is a thing that is almost like sirens because the function of them initially is for safety. It's important to be able to honk in a situation where, hey, look out, you might get hurt or killed. But honking is something that, unlike sirens, everyone has control over, and so they happen way more than is quote unquote necessary. And so I have found myself at times like responding to, like, if somebody stopped at a light, it turns green, somebody honks immediately to like longer and louder than I would, and I'll be like, why are they doing that? Basically, I become a horn myself. I'm like, why? No, don't do it. And I don't yell at them for doing that, but I've shared this with my girlfriend, and we have she's helped me try and when we get upset, see what we can do to, if it's raining, you can be upset that it's raining, or you can, hopefully acknowledge that it's raining, accept that it's raining, do what you have to do to get through it, because and it's not to say that you won't be upset if you're getting wet or if there's a loud noise, but there's a question of it happening and when you react, how much you react, and how long you live in that state of reaction. Because I believe emotions last for 90 seconds is what I've heard. And so if you're upset about something that happened more than 90 seconds ago, and it's not still happening, you are perpetuating that. You are remembering it, recalling it, reliving it. And that's the thing that I'm striving not to do. So for myself, it still doesn't always happen. When a horn honks, I will have a reaction, and I'll strive to then help, sort of let the air out of my reaction, laugh at myself and be like, there's me upset again.
Let me ask you, it was an interesting thing that you said emotions last 90 seconds.
Oh, yeah.
What about heartbreak? That could last for, I'm just curious. That's
120 seconds.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
I'm certainly not an expert, and I can't
gone
get
in
on the
60
phone the person who told me that, but here's my off the cuff, on the spot.
I know I'm digressing actually from the
an analogy.
topic of it.
I would say that it's perhaps the emotion in the moment is like the weather, and the heartbreak or the lasting effects of the sadness that you're going through is like the climate. It's something larger. I had a woman who is a climate scientist on my podcast, and she explained in reverse that,
and she broke your heart.
That the climate, the climate is like the personality, and that emotions, or the weather is like mood. So I would say when I got divorced, I was in a heightened state of emotional difficulty and sadness for a very intense and shorter period of time, and then over the course of time, I was still sad, disappointed,
I see what
broken
you're
up
saying.
about it.
I got
and
you.
it certainly wasn't only 90 seconds, but it was a shorter period of time that it was as heightened as it was.
Sure.
And so the exact number of seconds and minutes may vary.
Right, with the emotion too at hand, I guess.
So getting back to literally, I guess this will be the final word. Even though it bothers us, it's ultimately not a pressing matter on the safety of the world, but
which is something that is the point of this podcast.
I was watching a clip of Seinfeld a couple days ago, and Elaine says, "I was literally doing nothing," and you can't ever be literally doing nothing. But she says it, and that was in the mid-'90s. So when you brought up statistics, it would be interesting to see how much and I do find it,
and whether or not it actually indeed come from maybe a gender-specific thing at first. Maybe.
The style guide I looked at before coming here, but Brian Garner has a famous language style guide that said that early mention in writing, I think a newspaper column of literally misused was in the early 70s.
Really interesting.
Wow. So that would be interesting.
That's in the literature.
The literature.
Is in literature. So whether or not you dislike or don't really care about the word literally, or you don't even think about it,
or even want to be emphatic in your stance,
we hope
that you are right in using it however you want and want to use it as much as possible.
we hope this has this podcast episode on the word literally has opened up your eyes a little bit to
And your
this
ears.
ever ubiquitous
In fact, only your
word,
ears, really.
And maybe you can make your own judgment about this word. Mike,
or make no judgments at all.
Yeah.
And just, be concerned with the real problems in the world.
Just literally go with the flow.
Mike and Kevin, we were very happy that you were able to come on this
Thank you
podcast
so
today.
much.
Would you like to plug anything, Mike?
I'd be happy to. I'll first offer an apology, but also a thank you for understanding that. Of course, I think that I understand the spirit of the podcast is obviously not in this moment to endeavor to solve all of the woes of the world. And so it is sort of, I feel like I still am my old self, I'm nitpicking myself now for being a little, I think, well motivated, but still nitpicky in a way, in that when you said how do you feel about the word literally? And I'm like, well, there are problems in the world and it's not one of the major ones. That clearly wasn't addressing I'd like to think that I also answered the question.
But you agreed to be on this podcast,
Yes.
so but by doing so, I did not think.
But also,
that
all
was
the points
more
that
for
you
the,
brought up really led to some, in my opinion,
glad.
fascinating
That was
conversation.
not me responding to that. Was not in response to you, but it was more just to clarify to the listener. Actually,
Of course. I think it would be funny if I went on, I said yes to every podcast, and then whatever the topic was, I came in, I'm like, why are we not talking about climate change?
Sure.
I mean, I think
It's all that matters.
That might be, in some ways, the right thing to do, and in other ways, the wrong thing to do.
But we found a way to have some sort of analogy to
right
climate
and
change
wrong
with
is,
this episode.
And so thank you for having me and for offering the opportunity to plug my podcast, which is called Broccoli and Ice Cream, where I talk to people about the work of their life and the joys of their life as represented by broccoli and ice cream. And also Mike
that's
Kaplan.
fun.
I enjoy both of those.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. You can enjoy your work and your joy. You can work at your joy. You can be joyful at work. There's a lot of intertwining.
I also enjoy broccoli and ice cream.
Oh, literally. You can listen metaphorically, and that was, I feel like, a perfect example. You must, in this case, using the word literally to tell me that you like broccoli and ice cream would have been an appropriate, helpful thing. Because if you're like, I like broccoli and ice cream. Oh, do you mean the thing or my podcast?
Sure.
So my name is Mike Kaplan. It's spelled MyQKaplan. If you put that into any of the online places, social media, my website, my email, you can follow me on those. You can get my albums, and I have a special that's on Amazon called Small, Dork, and Handsome. So any of those things I appreciate you're checking out. If you want to, if you're like, how do I, in addition to buying your albums, how do I give you money? I have a Patreon, and you can get bonus podcast episodes there as well.
Very fun.
We'll ask you this off.
Sure.
And Kevin,
air,
any? I mean,
Hey,
Kevin,
follow me on Instagram at Money Death Sex. My name's Kevin Crooks. This has been so fun, guys. Thank you very much for having me.
Kevin,
It's
it was a
always been
pleasure having you guys on
having you
today.
on. Mike,
Thank you
it's
so
been
much.
A great pleasure having you on the podcast. And you guys are what I think to be very articulate people.
Yeah.
In spite of what you said, Kevin, I think you were judging yourself about that earlier.
So.
And which is why we enjoyed this podcast so much, and which is why we wanted you guys on this podcast for this particular topic.
For those of you at home or on the subway or wherever you are listening, thank you all for tuning in to another edition of Splitting Hairs with Max and Nicky.
Tune in next time.